All right, so we've got our disk space issue fixed here. Let's go back to what we were doing, and that was the first time I think we saw this was get command module DNS client. There we go, that looks a little better. Amazing what strange error messages you will see if you run out of disk space. So anyway, this shows me some pretty helpful commands. That's why I chose this one, because this allows you to do things like show the DNS client cache, to register DNS records, to use like NSLOOKUP or resolve DNS name. Now don't worry about if it says function or commandlet. It's slight differences, but they're modeling the functions after the commandlet, so they use the same type of syntax. Okay? And then you've got your, go get DNS client, and that will just list out the different interfaces. The get DNS client server address would actually show you DNS client server address would show you the IP addresses of your name servers on each of your interfaces. And mine are public because I'm using just my host machine here, and so it's got public DNS servers through the ISP. Get DNS client cache. These are just really useful ones. That shows places I've gone. Google, Dropbox is in there. So that's just a way of seeing what names have been resolved on this system. Okay, so you can do that with any, and let's do help, and then the name of a commandlet. So let's say help new VM. Okay, and it shows me the syntax for that commandlet. Okay, looks like I do still need to download and get some updated help files. So we'll type in update help. I think I did that on the virtual machine. All right, but then that'll go out and grab that stuff. And what I can do, I'm going to switch over to my VM here. What I can do at that point is I can type in help, and then whatever the command is that I'm looking for, get process, for instance, and then dash examples, and it'll show me examples of that commandlet. Okay, some commands will have up to, I think I've seen up to 12 or 13 examples. And so I really like that one. Here's one that has 10. If you do go dash full or dash detailed, it will show you the syntax, it'll give you a description of the command, and it'll go parameter by parameter, show you the data type, show you whether it's a required parameter, positional or name, does it accept piped input, it goes on and on and on, okay? And that can get a little bit overly complex, but you do get a lot of information that way. Another useful one is the show window option, which basically just opens up your help file in this separate window. And some people like that because it's just a little bit easier to see. It also has a find on it. So if you were looking for a particular parameter, then you could check it out. So computer name, there's 4 matches, and we just go next, 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 and we find all the instances of computer name. Okay, so show window can be very helpful too. Get alias. There's a list of aliases. There's a ton of them in here. You'll see me doing things like, potentially changing directories or doing CLS to clear the screen. Well, why am I able to do that? If I go get alias CLS, we'll see that that's mapped to the clear host commandlet. Okay? If I go get alias dir, that's mapped to the get child item. And we could go on and on and on. Make directory. Okay, or MD is for make directory. That one actually is just the command line version. It doesn't have a PowerShell equivalent. But these are all called transitional aliases. And they're transitional aliases just because they're trying to make it easier to transition from the old command prompt style administration to PowerShell administration. Okay? All right, I think that gets us started and good enough. One last thing that we can do if we, I'd already said, you can just cycle up and down if you want to go back through the commands that you have entered, and then as soon as you hit enter, it will actually execute, okay? All right, so as I said, that gets us started, but that's not all we have to talk about PowerShell, because there's another program called the PowerShell ISE, and then there's the option of using remote PowerShell. Along with PowerShell, we have another program known as the PowerShell ISE, or the Integrated Scripting Environment. This is a host application that allows administrators to run commands as well as to design, write, test, debug scripts, but it's more of a GUI. Now, it's a GUI that has a command shell embedded in it, but as you'll see, it really does make it a lot easier to do a few things. I mean, number one, it's great from a learning perspective, some of the things that it does. Number two, it color codes items even more so than the regular PowerShell window, and it indicates when there are errors in code. Number three, you can debug and you can kind of step through a script and make sure the contents of the variables are right and the pipelines are functioning correctly. And so, I mean, that's well beyond what we're going to get into, but we still want to point out the existence of this utility. It can be used to run any PowerShell expression or command. You can use commandlets, providers, snap-ins, modules, the same way you would use them in a standard PowerShell console. And you can change the views. There's a command view, there's an output view, there's script panes, and you can modify those as needed. Technically, ISE has what it's called its own PowerShell profile, so that's going to allow you to actually write functions, scripts, aliases, variables, and then you can make sure that those are always loaded every time you open up PowerShell ISE. But the syntax coloring, the selective invocation, that's just running one line of code out of multiple lines, multiple sessions. It's a script editor. And so if you get into PowerShell scripting, this is definitely a great utility to have. All right, so let's take a look at the PowerShell ISE. Search for PowerShell, and you've got Windows PowerShell, and then you've got the PowerShell ISE. We'll run it as an administrator. Okay, and now that opened up, and it doesn't really look any different until the command pane shows up. You also aren't really showing the script pane. Okay, so this is the command pane, this is the console, and this would be the script pane. Now up in the script pane, when I type things, get process, notice it's using something called IntelliSense. So I don't even have to cycle through. I can just go in and start entering, you know. And so then we can write a script here, basically, that says read host, please enter a computer name. And it's underlining that in red because I didn't have an ending quote. Now it's underlining in it red because I haven't put my ending parentheses. Okay, so we see there how it's doing syntax coloring and it's kind of helping me out. That's what I meant to do. Okay, so basically, if I were to run this, it would say, please enter a computer name, and then I would, gotta figure out what my computer name is here. That's fun, okay. Guess I should have changed that. Desktop dash CHOU, and then I think that is an I. Sorry about that. I didn't have a good name there. Okay, so we see it worked. It was just that was a fairly complex computer name. So I run that command. So I mean, at this point, that's not a whole lot different than if you just ran it in the command in PowerShell. Okay, but if you're down here, this is why I said it was great from a learning perspective. Because if I go get event log, it does the same thing. It's using the same what's called IntelliSense to help me out. So I know I need log name, and then it even shows me the potential values for log name. Okay? And then I want computer name or not. You know, maybe I want entry type. So it really can help you out. In this case, it's going to show me those newest and then 10. You know, and so you run the same command when all is said and done, but you got a lot of assistance in doing it. Over here on the command pane, we've even got more. You know, because I've got a list of all the modules. So what we looked at before, DNS client, we just click on that, and then we can see what's there. Okay? So if you say, okay, I want to see the help on get DNS client server address, we show details, and it shows me what is going to be, you know, asked for, basically. Get DNS client server address, and if you specify an internet or an interface alias, local area connection. Let me go get net. Get net IP interface because I just want to see the names of those. And we're looking for local area network or local area connection number 3. So I just have to get that right one, or I can use the index instead. Let me actually just do that. 2, index is number 2, okay? So the reason that I'm doing that is, it's showing me some of the parameters, and then what you can do is you can say you want to insert that and hit enter, okay? So it actually provided you a GUI through which you can, then execute commands. You can pop commands into the console and do it that way. And we could go on and on and on. I mean, I can go down through all different kinds of things. Let's go to this and we'll say, okay, I want to look at the help on new VM and using Hyper-V. And so we show details. Anything that is wildcarded, if it's a new VHD, if anything that's wildcarded is going to be a requirement, okay? And so some of these are going to be requirements and some are not. We go down, and it just kind of lays out exactly what I would want to do, how I would run this command. Okay, so those are, and that's scratching the surface by, any stretch of the imagination here. We're just touching the edges, but it shows us this utility and it shows us hopefully how useful it can be in even just learning PowerShell. Another big advantage that we have in PowerShell is the ability to perform remote management. It gives us the ability to do remote command line administration to manage network computers, and it's doing so using a standard management protocol known as WS management, or just WS-man for short. What this allows me to do is create scripts that'll run against the local computer, but also against one or many remote computers. We can take control of a remote session to run commands directly on a computer. You can do things like create system restore points or restore a system remotely back to a previous time. We can collect performance data across the network. We could modify firewall rules, and we can use PowerShell scripts in GPOs. So the remote management capabilities of PowerShell just really represent another great feature. There are a couple of different types of PowerShell remoting that you would want to be familiar with. The first is a fan-out type. This is a one-to-many remoting capability. It allows administrators to run a script from one console across multiple computers. Okay? This could be a script that gets a list of computers on which it's going to act, or from a text file, or it could just be a list. A lot of the commands will have a computer name parameter, and if you pipe a list into that parameter, or if you just specify a comma delimited list of computers, then it will execute against all those computers. That's called fan out. And then you also have one-to-one. Interactive remoting, that allows you to remotely troubleshoot a specific computer. It is done still in a couple of different ways, but a lot of times we just connect to a remote computer, or we establish a session on a remote computer and then connect to that session. The connections can be temporary or persistent. If it's temporary, you start an interactive session and then you use the invoke commandlet and execute a command against a remote computer, and then the session closes when the command is done. Okay, so you basically hit the remote computer, run a command, get the results, send them back to the source, and then it's over. If you create a PS session, new PS session as the commandlet, then you're creating a persistent connection. You can then connect to the remote computer and enter that session. So, the determining factor of which one you use is really just going to depend on the scenario. If you're just looking for one piece of information, then you can just do a one-time temporary connection. If you're going to run a long-running script, or you want a job that you need to go back and check the results, then you can do persistent connections. There are some commandlets in PowerShell that are native to these remoting capabilities. The first is invoke command. Invoke command, then the name of a command, and then the computer that you want to invoke the command on. And so that's just a remoting option. New PS session and enter PS session. The first creates, the second one connects to it. And all these commands support a use SSL parameter, which will add security to the whole process. There are also several commandlets that have a computer name parameter. If it has a computer name parameter, that usually means that it can be used to execute locally, but it can also be used to execute remotely. So get process, get service, get event log, get WMI objects, which gets you into the Windows Management Instrumentation database, add computer, remove computer, restart computer. All of those support a computer name parameter, which means you can run them against a remote machine. That would be considered a one-to-one type of remoting unless you use a variable and you pipe, multiple names into the computer name parameter. So let's take a look at just a couple of these options. We're going to go into our VM here. So get process on the local computer. I'm going to go pipe more just so we see the first few. Actually, you know what? I want get service. Just so we see the first few, okay? These are my first few on this machine. You see the A's. I'm doing that for a particular purpose. We're going to say get service, only this time we're going to specify computer name, and the computer name is going to be KBDC1. Okay? And then it's going to run that command against the remote computer. One way we know that it's doing that is it's taking a little bit more time to do it, but it should display a list of services from that remote computer. Assuming that I've got the name right, assuming that remote management is turned on, assuming that I have permissions. Looks like all those assumptions were correct. We got a list of that, and the reason I noted the first few is because I knew the first couple here would be different. We have the Active Directory Web Services. That's a domain controller. We've got a DNS server service. That's not on there. DFS replication, that wouldn't be on the client either. Okay, so you have some, and you know that you've gotten that information from the remote computer. Okay. You can use the get event logs, you can use the get processes as well. We can also use the invoke command line utility. Okay. Invoke command, here is the remote computer, and then here is the command that I want to run. Okay. Get process. And it's really the same thing, and in fact with the get process command it's kind of pointless to do it that way because you don't need to do it that way. You could just run get process computer name, but it's another way of doing it. You can also create a new PS session. The name of the PS session is, we'll just call the name of the computer. The computer name, KBDC1, use SSL if we want to use that. Okay. So that creates a session. It's an open session on that system. Now I say enter PS session KBDC1, and it goes into that. Now the difference is now this says KBDC1 over here. That's the name of the domain controller. Now when I just type get process or get service, I'm going to get and the tab complete takes a little longer sometimes the first time you do that. I'm going to get the list of services on that machine. Same list of services, but now I'm in a session. Now I'm seeing that on that machine. Now I don't have to worry about computer name parameters and things like that. I can just grab events out of the event logs and see, let's see, the system and the newest 25. Okay, so without having to bother with the computer name. So if you're, as I said, it depends on the scenario. If you want to issue multiple commands against a remote computer, then you probably create a session and you enter that session, you run your commands, and then you exit the session. Exit PS session, and then you can remove PS session, which gets rid of it when you're all done. So that's just a glimpse at remoting. With the sessions, there's really no limit to what you can do. The other way, the one-to-one, just temporary stuff, you're limited as to which commandlets have the computer name parameter. But if you're entering into a session, then whatever commands I can run against that remote computer sitting at the computer are the same ones that I can run from my Windows 10 machine. So as I said, that should be seen as a mini crash course on PowerShell to get us started. As we go along, we might visit PowerShell a few times, and I want to always make sure that introduction is out of the way so it's not the first time you've ever seen it. If we're talking about Hyper-V and I jump into PowerShell and create a new VM with a PowerShell command. Or when we're talking about network connectivity and I go in and want to clear the DNS client cache or test a network connection, so that this gets us that initial introduction.